Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Getting Defensive. I am Craig Reith, and as always, we have the IDP tipster himself, Gary. I know it's been a little bit of a hectic night again, but how are you doing tonight?
Yeah, I dropped the ball again. Hello, fantasy football friends. I'm over here crashing and burning again. If you guys watched Tuesday, I just did it again, thinking we was going to go at 10, and our guest is on a timeline. It's been one of those weeks, folks, but good news, I got all my IDP rankings done. I think you did yours, John, recently.
Yeah, I did my PPR offensive player rankings. I don't rank IDP players, but I've had my rankings done. Pretty much had them done before the NFL draft. And when the rookies got drafted, I put those guys on the teams, and then put an initial projection or initial set of rankings out, a top 30 list back in June, and then just recently put out a top 40. So,
I hear I just wrecked it again. Craig, will you introduce John for us?
It's all right. It works as a segue. As Gary alluded to, our special guest tonight here to talk about all things Jets and the defense is Jon Jeune. You can find him as the host of the Fantasy Football Diagnostics podcast, and he's also the host of Jets podcast.
And now we have Liftoff, New York Jets.
Now we have Liftoff. Yep, that's it. Nice. And I do pay attention to Jet stuff on offense a bit too. I'm a Cowboys fan, but Jamison Crowder is however long he's a Jet for yet, is my favorite player in the league for weird reasons. But regardless, glad to have you on, John. You guys, if you don't have him on Twitter, make sure you go. His Twitter handle is there on screen. How are things for you tonight, John?
Yeah, man. I mean, look, Gary, Craig, I'm very appreciative to be on here. I've been on before with Gary. I think it was at the day after the draft. We talked.
Yeah, we did the IDP forum. That was a bit too much. So I have not repeated those.
Had fun, but like you said, I'm the host of the Fantasy Football Diagnostics podcast, so you could definitely check us out there. Also, contributor with Gridiron Ratings, so. You can find my rankings on the Gridiron Ratings website, and then you could also, be on the special lookout for something that me and Matthew McCarthy are working on in the behind the scenes. Don't want to give too much away, but also, like you mentioned, for all the Jets fans out there listening, host of the Now We Have Liftoff New York Jets podcast, and my co-host Frank Piccolo. So definitely want to check that out. We're running two times, one show every 2 weeks. Right now, but as we get to in season, we'll be one show a week, previewing and reviewing and previewing previous games and the next games. And so definitely can check me out there. My Twitter handle at JR Football Nerd. I know it looks like it's pronounced Junior, but it's JR. So I've been on a media tour correcting that. I feel like across the past few months. So JR Football Nerd. But yeah, I'm ready to talk some Jets IDP, man. I'm definitely.
Cool. All right. And I do just want to note, our thoughts go out to Greg Knapp's family and the Jets organization. Just some terrible news the past few days and today with the overall loss. And since we're talking about Jets, I really felt we should note that. So if you guys didn't see that, keep them in your thoughts and prayers as you're moving forward. So
definitely.
Moving on to the defensive side of the ball here. So we're going to start off sort of looking over the staff and the scheme because they do have a new coaching staff here. Robert Saleh came in and he brought with him Mike LaFleur for offense. But on the defense, and it sounds like, and John, please correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but Jeff Ulbricht's probably going to be the play caller on the defense for him. So what do you foresee as far as any schematic type changes with Saleh and then Ulbricht?
Yeah, I mean, with Saleh coming over, obviously they're going to make that transition from the, they've been a 3-4 defense. I mean, last year they were a little bit more multiple. The last 2 years with Greg Williams with their fronts. But I think the personnel that they're looking for is more 4-3 personnel, whereas in years past it's been 3-4 personnel. And I think the scheme-wise, you're going to see a lot of the stuff that Saleh did with the Niners back in San Fran. But I think you're also going to see some of the stuff that Ulbricht did with Atlanta, and they've talked about that it's not just going to be Saleh's defense, and it's not just going to be Ulbricht's defense. It's going to be these two, kind of working together it's going to be Salah's defense, but Ulbricht's going to be the one calling the plays, right? So he's going to be the one spicing it up. It's going to have his own flavor on it. And if you look at the Atlanta defense, when Ulbricht was the one calling plays, I mean, he was I think 1 year in 2019, Raheem Morris was calling the passing downs while Ulbricht called first and second down. And then last year when Dan Quinn was relieved of his duties, he called defense full time. And so they played some pretty good offenses too down the stretch. Tampa Bay, Kansas City, the Raiders, who had been on fire at that point by the time they caught them. And so I think Ulbricht is going to come in and really put these players in position to make plays.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at it, sort of like when Quinn got fired, they did have some of those high-powered, offenses that they faced on that defense. And outside of the Buccaneers, I don't think there was any of them that completely blew them out of the water. With a defense that had a lot of injuries and not IDP-wise, a whole lot of help. So it's really interesting to see from that perspective, him getting a full shot here to sort of run a defense. Yeah, like you said, he'll have help. But it seems like they're really trying to look at a culture change too after what they went through with Adam Gase. And is that something that you're hearing about so far with the new coaching staff?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard culture change for years, almost every year with the New York Jets, right? But I think Jets fans and even media have talked about how they're tired of that until we see a change. But I think when you consider Joe Douglas really being given the full keys to really build this team in his image, and when I say Joe Douglas, I'm obviously talking about the general manager, really build the team in his image, and he got to go out and pick his head coach and gets a guy like Robert Saleh, who, in a league that's full of nepotism and network and relationships. Him and Robert Saleh had no previous relationship. They had no previous connection. And he ends up on the interview list. They just kind of threw him on because he was a hot candidate, and immediately him and Saleh hit it off. And so I think that synergy that's natural. It wasn't like, oh, hey, we threw Adam Gase onto Mike McCagnon, or now we're going to stick Joe Douglas with Adam Gase, or even when it was they stuck Mike McCagnon with Todd Bowles. And, you could go down the list, right? Like Rex Ryan with John Idzik. Like, this was actually born out of true chemistry that two guys sat down and they said, hey, I like this guy. I want to work with him. And so I think when you consider that that's how the culture is getting started, I think that the direction is headed in the right place.
My question is, after you sum all this up, we have that news today with Craig Knapp. So do you think in an overall aspect, not to get away from your line there, does this affect your offense enough that we're going to see some of this defense on the field, or is Zach Wilson going to be able to get it done without his mentoring?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's unfortunate what happened with Greg Knapp, and rest in peace. May he rest in peace, and definitely thoughts and prayers for his family. In terms of a football analysis, Greg Knapp was the passing game coordinator for Zach Wilson. Obviously, Mike LaFleur, the offensive coordinator, and then they also have Rob Calabrese, who's the quarterback's coach. And so there's definitely going to be a hit on game day. We don't know what it was because obviously we never saw this coaching staff and how it operated, and we don't really know what his duties were.
Right.
But I have to imagine that those three guys, Greg Knapp, Rob Calabrese, and offensive coordinator Mike LaFleur, are the ones solely responsible with getting Zach Wilson ready for week one. And so, not just week one, but throughout every week of the season. And so that's going to have some impact, right? It has to, I think, is it going to be to the point where it reverberates to the defensive side of the football? Maybe. I mean, the difference, overall is minor, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I was just curious. I know there's not a lot of there's not a lot of coaches out there right now that you guys can go grab. So hopefully he's had this in place, and then Zach Wilson was already working, because that's a big loss and hard to replace that. So that's what I was wondering. Are we going to see this? Do you think that we're going to see that defense on the field more? There might be a couple more three and outs or something at the beginning, but I'm sure that they'll probably iron it out. So I'm not going to – doesn't really affect IDP from what I understand you're saying.
All right. So now we're going to sort of move into an overall personnel review. We're going to take probably each level and sort of break it down from there. But the Jets went out and they signed good 10, 12 free agents to the defense this past offseason. There's some big names in there and some big money being thrown around. But overall, it's not like they went wild either. Do any of the names just off the bat on the defense that they signed, like a LaMarcus Joyner, or Carl Lawson's probably the big one, but any names that jumped out to you that you remember at the time you were thinking, wow, I like that for the team?
Yeah, Carl Lawson is definitely the one that sticks out the most. I mean, he's a guy that career high 8.5 sacks, I think it was, as a rookie. Hasn't had more than 5.5 since then, but they gave him a big contract, 3 years, $45 million, $30 million guaranteed. So you look at how he fits into this Robert Saleh defense. He's going to stick in right at that defensive end spot in that wide 9 scheme, where he's going to get out and use his speed and his leverage to really affect the quarterback. And the Jets believe Jeff Ulbrich, the defensive coordinator, he said this in his press conference earlier during minicamp and OTAs, that he believes that Carl Lawson will be more productive over here with the New York Jets just because of the players that they have on the interior of the defensive line here, where quarterbacks won't be able to step up because there's going to be nowhere to step up to when you look at, obviously Quinnen Williams, who we'll get into in a little bit, and Sheldon Rankins, who they also signed, which I think is going to make an impact on, as an interior rusher. I think Carl Lawson definitely is going to make an impact here as the edge rusher. He's going to be the best edge rusher the Jets have had since John Abraham. And, that's sounds like high praise, but the bar has been set very low.
Yeah.
Here.
I mean, when you've had Jenkins, didn't you have
Jordan Jenkins?
Yeah, Jordan
Calvin
Jenkins
Pace.
for the last there is nowhere but up. So I hope he works out. I mean, if he can turn his pressures and his QB hits into actual sacks, you guys are going to get your $45 million's worth. If not, I'm pumping the brakes on him. The one discouraging part that I didn't like was last year when he had his chance for a couple of games on the weak side with Hubbard hurt, and they had already gotten rid of Dunlap, and they did a little bit extra rotation, I believe, with them with the Bengals. He didn't really produce from that weak side line, and that that's his. I'm sure he's going to be your blindside guy rushing. I'm personally worried a little bit about the talent. I know you got Williams coming back, and he's a complete stud. I like your other defensive tackle. I think might be starting too, but you got question at the other side rusher. Who do you think is going to be there?
Yeah, I think that you're going to see a lot of guys used in different ways, right? And I think, when you look at probably what their best, we don't know. We know how often base defense is really used, but when you look at what their first and second down defensive line looks like, I think the best case scenario is you have Sheldon or Carl Lawson out at your one edge. You've got Quinnen Williams as your 3 technique, Foley Fatukasi as your nose, and then John Franklin Myers, I think, is the guy you were referring to before. He's the guy that can play, strong side edge, and, match up with those tight ends, beat those tight ends up in the run game.
You don't want it to be Curry. Some people got Curry.
I don't think. I think Curry fits more like when we talk about these defensive. When we talk about these nickel packages, right? Curry can slide out and be the opposite end, or maybe he can spell Carl Lawson on certain passes or certain downs and distances, things of that nature. But I think you're going to see a rotation. I mean, Robert Saleh's defensive lines, they used to just bring guys in. It was almost just like hockey lines. I don't even watch hockey, but I'm going to use that reference. But they used to bring those guys in. And so I think you're going to see a similar thing here with the New York Jets, because they're deep, man. They really are at the defensive line. Before Carl Lawson and Sheldon Rankins and Vinny Curry, it was the best, deepest position they had on this team.
Yeah,
and
it was mainly the edge rushers. You guys couldn't
they don't have them.
Yeah,
they don't exist.
I can't think. Well, who'd you name as the last
Jordan
guy?
Jenkins, Calvin Pace. I mean,
who was the last successful guy?
oh, John Abraham.
Yeah, right. Yep. That's been a while.
17 years ago. It's
Yeah.
been a little while.
Gee.
Well, since we're on the defensive line, I mean, we can just continue with that, I suppose. And, you'd mentioned one of the guys that I think could take some people by surprise for their defensive line there, Franklin Myers. Boy, I like him there. The team certainly liked what he was able to do last year, and him being able to move in. At least he's a guy that's going to have a shot. He's another guy with youth. To your guys' point, Curry is sort of the old man there to teach the young guys, how to do stuff. And he was a fine pass rusher in his day, but I think it's a little bit past him. Someone else that they had, I think he was an undrafted free agent for him, but he showed a little bit, and he has nice athleticism. Bryce Huff, do you see anything for him in a situational role?
Yeah, so we actually were breaking down the defensive line this week for the Now We Have Liftoff New York Jets podcast, and we were trying to decide, who's going to make this roster on this defensive line, because they're bringing like 11, 12 guys to camp, and you figure only 8 or 9 of them will make the team. And I was saying Bryce Huff, to me, he's a guy that has to make the team, because Vinny Curry aside, there's no one else like Carl Lawson on this roster. Bryce Huff is the closest person to it from a body, just a body type and a skill set perspective. When you look at just a guy that can use burst and speed to get around the edge and kind of wreak havoc. And that's what your hope is with Bryce Huff. Not to say that, he's going to develop into this double-digit sack guy, but, he's a guy that can come off the bench and get you 3 to 5 sacks in a year.
If I remember right, I think Foley, I ain't going to even attempt his last name. Didn't he?
Foley Fadakasi.
Yeah, didn't he flash a few times last year? He got the opportunity.
He did. He definitely did more than flash.
Right,
I mean, he was one of the best interior run defenders in the entire NFL. Right. I actually compared him to Snacks Harrison a little bit the other day. Just another former New York Jet, undrafted. Foley wasn't under.
What do you think they could translate into for IDP? Not to interrupt you, but I'm just.
Well, so in previous defenses, right, that this defensive line was more catching. They were more passive. More moving laterally. I think in this defense, they're going to be more upfield. And I think that's, from an IDP perspective, that's more beneficial, because now you're getting more involved on tackle production. And so I think Foley Fadakasi probably doesn't help much from a IDP perspective, because his upside is not going to be that high. But in leagues where, maybe you get tiered scoring for your defensive tackles getting a tackle or something like that. Maybe Foley Fadakasi provides some value that way, but he's not going to get it through sacks or affecting the quarterback.
Yeah. I suspect, I do the 32 start sits for all defensive players, and and for the deepest leagues, I will plug a guy if he's got the right matchup. And I do believe last year, the reason he's ringing a bell is he might have had like 1 or 2 performances, maybe at least one, that it was all on paper. The matchup was right. Everything was there. The stars were aligned, and I said, if you guys are desperate, and I put him in there as somebody to pick up. And he was serviceable, when you're trying to get through those bye weeks and those deep leagues, you just don't need a 0.
Yeah, so, exactly.
And I think that I like what you guys got going on. It really, really, what you got in Williams. It really comes down to Carl, I think.
Can I get a minute to just serenade Quentin Williams real quick? Because because
anybody deserves it, he does.
I think this dude is in for a monster year. I mean, I've been saying it basically since Saleh was hired, that this guy is going to be one of the breakout players in the NFL in 2021. This guy is just, you look at what he did in 13 games last year: 7 sacks, 14 quarterback hits. I mean, he was just an absolute beast for opposing offensive lines and opposing quarterbacks.
As an interior defensive lineman, folks, that is hot.
And he was the only thing on the defensive line that was worth doubling or trying to give extra attention to. Yep. And now you've got a true edge rusher, not like some 275, 80-pound 3 technique that they're like, hey, can you go play Can you go play edge rusher Muhammad Wilkerson or Leonard Williams or so on and so forth? There's a true edge rusher out there. And so Quinnen Williams is going to be an absolute beast on the football field this year. And I think if you're in IDP leagues and you're looking for a defensive tackle, Quinnen Williams has to be near the top of your list.
I'm not sure if I've got him quite that high, but I got him there. I mean, he's right there. It's just a full season of really just getting at it. If he gets that eight sacks, I don't know. What do you think, Craig?
I mean, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. Go right ahead, John.
No, I was just going to add one other point, which is that the defense now is going to be perfect for him, right? Robert Saleh said he can't wait to just let him go because Quinnen has not been attacking. And when you look at him, what do people had compared him to Aaron Donald at times. I'm not going to say he's that level of player, but the skill set, the ferocity with which they play, the speed, the quickness, the athleticism, that's all there with Quinnen, but you weren't seeing it because he was playing in this passive catching lateral moving defense. Now you get to see him in attacking upfield, playing the 3 technique, which is something I've been crying about for Quinnen. Like, stop playing him at nose, play him at the 3 technique so he can.
They do the same damn thing with Kenny Clark in Green Bay, man. He would be so much better of a player if they would just stick him on the outer edge interior defensive line instead of nose tackle. But and that might be why I might be cautious myself. But go ahead, Craig, man. I don't mean to keep talking. John's got me excited.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, as far as if you're looking dynasty rankings for defensive tackles, Quinnen is my number 2. And I've been searching him out in any leagues because most of my leagues have gone to either that interior lineman with the edge players or a defensive tackle specific. And I view him because, Donald is amazing, but at some point he's going to fall off here just with how much he's being used and he's getting up there in age. And there needs to be another, young guy coming up, taking that spot. And if I'm putting my money on someone, it's going to be Quinnen. I mean, the way he's talked about the coach, Saleh's talked about him, to John's point. I mean, it just sounds like a match made in heaven. And I'm really excited with other talent around there to see what he's able to do.
No. There's a funny thing. One thing that you repeated was they're going to tell him to get after it instead of going sideways. Don't go get yours and don't take what the offensive line give you. And I bet that has not been heard in the Jets locker room. They're like, what's he talking about? Then everybody else is just really like, finally. Something we can work with there. You guys got that interior defensive line really shored up with Williams. I like that. We're going to run out of time here. We better.
Yeah, we're moving on here. We're going up to the linebackers here. With Mosley returning after a couple of years out, one with injury, and then I believe he opted out last year. I know Gary's a little excited for Jared Davis to get his name out there again. So, John, how do you feel about this sort of remade linebacking core, especially with those kind of rookies that are transitioning to sort of that outside linebacker position for them?
Level with us, John. I can take it if you tell me Davis is a pipe dream.
So I think that there's a world where this linebacking core is potentially more productive than people might think it is, right? Because people on the outside looking at CJ Mosley, how far removed he is from football, but everything you've heard from not just the beat writers, but players on the team, Quinnen Williams, even some of the rookies, like it's the same CJ Mosley. And CJ Mosley was never a guy that won because he was more freakishly athletic than you. He was a guy that won because he was always in the right spot at the right time, and that's because he has high football IQ, and he was always well prepared. And I don't think CJ Mosley lost that. And so I think he's going to come in. He's going to, pick up where he left off as one of the, as a top 7, 8 inside linebacker in the league. I know there's some guys that have leaped up ahead of him since he's been, had his hiatus a little bit. But, I think he's still going to be that dominating level of player. I mean, his only real game with the New York Jets, he probably had one of the best IDP
I remember that
days that you could have, and he didn't even finish the game. And so, I definitely have high hopes for CJ Mosley. In regards to Jared Davis, the signing initially when it happened was kind of weird. He was the first player that they signed, and
it was the first linebacker, maybe the top 3 in all of free agency.
Yeah, and so for him to sign that quickly, that kind of caught a lot of Jet fans' attention. Like, okay, well, what are their plans for Jared Davis? And the more and more I see how they filled out this linebacking core through the draft, like Craig, you had alluded to with these defensive backs that are transitioning to linebacker, it's pretty clear to me Jared Davis. I know, Gary, you had thoughts that Jared Davis probably going to be the will. I think
I actually named him back in March or April. He is my linebacker breakout for this year. And when I do breakouts, I go deep. I don't go vanilla on these. So I go deep. And I figured that was a good one there. And I'm feeling really good about it. But I don't expect like tier 1. That would be nice. But that's not my breakout, folks. So just make sure you understand where I'm coming from. This is deep. No, was when I made it.
And I think he'll have productive weeks. I just, with that Sam linebacker spot, and I don't know how often he'll be used in coverage. Will he really be playing on those third downs? And with the Jets being so deep on the defensive line and actually having an edge presence, the only other role that really makes sense is, okay, well, we've seen Jared Davis used as a, on the line of scrimmage blitzer before. Does he fill a role like that with the Jets? I think that's definitely possible. That's just my concern is how much is he going to play on third down? And if as a linebacker and IDP, I mean, Gary, you probably know better than me, but I'm looking for guys that are on the field for all 3 downs because that's the best way.
It's getting tougher and tougher to get those every down guys on inside linebacker too.
No, definitely. But while we're still in the linebacker position, I'm going to switch over to these rookies and Jamie and Sherwood and Hamza Nasruddin. The coaching staff has spoken real highly of both of those players. I know a lot of Nasruddin gets a lot of the buzz. Sherwood was the higher draft pick, so it makes it a little bit interesting. But I'm actually all in to Nasruddin. Just I don't follow much about college football or college players until it's draft time. And I'm to tell you, if I told you I was looking at defensive players, I'd be a liar. But everything I heard about Hamza Nasruddin is that this kid was probably a third round talent. I've heard first out there, but I don't know how true that would have been, but before he tore his ACL at Florida State. And so this guy, you have that talent, and then to get him where you got him in the 6th round, and then to say, yeah, he's going to play a weak side linebacker for us. I think to me, that's like, again, I'm not trying to announce the guy king of, rookie IDP land, but I think this is a pretty good bet to make. And he goes cheap enough in these rookie IDP drafts that I've been in that you can get him. It doesn't cost you anything to get Hamza Nasruddin. No. And if he can, we've seen what they did with Fred Warner. He was a nickel at BYU that they converted into one of the best linebackers in the league, the highest paid linebacker in the league as of yesterday. And so to that point, I think Hamza has really high upside when you consider Robert Saleh. He's a defensive coach, but has a history as a linebackers coach. And then Jeff Ulbrich, who also had history doing similar things with a guy in Foye Oluokun over in Atlanta, as well as Jon Jeune, who was a little undersized as a linebacker as well. But both of those guys have had success in that Atlanta defense.
And Okalune in college for Yale, he was one of my breakout calls a couple years ago. But either way, Okalune, he was a safety at Yale till his senior year. He played linebacker.
It's funny because I went to NFL.com and went to go pull up the scouting report on Hamza Nasruddin, and the player comparison in there was Foye Oluokun. And so
that's pretty funny.
It's interesting when you see that, and then you see the Jets take him, and the history of the coaching staff that was involved with that pick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, size-wise, they're very comparable, and I didn't think Hamza was really going to be a good fit in the NFL at safety just because of his size, and you don't see a whole lot of those guys just back there full-time anymore. But the way that you've seen a lot of these hybrids play now, if he can make it, yeah, he has a chance, definitely, maybe not this year, but overall to be a high impact player for him, because he certainly was in college at Florida State when he was healthy. And on a team that had a lot of talent but didn't do a whole lot the past couple of years, he was a bright spot. So I'm pulling for him.
Now, the only thing I could add at all, because you pretty well wrapped it up. I noticed you didn't talk about Cashman. A lot of people are thinking Cashman's got the edge. I like Cashman, but I don't. Even if he starts the year as a starter, it's kind of by default. And I mean, there's no reason to, within a certain amount of time, your rookie here could actually take over. It's a matter of Cashman getting hurt, or it's a matter of him just, his job to lose. Borderline talent, kind of, in my opinion.
Yeah, I like Cashman, the player. I think that, like you said, it's just a matter of if he's going to get hurt, and he already got hurt in OTAs and minicamp. And the first person
he did.
The first person to take those first team reps was Hamza Nasruddin. So
sweet, God, listen up, folks. Here's your Jets connection.
All right, well, we will move on to the secondary, and this had some interesting news in it too recently coming out. Right now, it sort of looks like you have Marcus May and Ashton Davis as probable starters, although there's been information coming out that this may be Marcus May's last year, and we can touch on that a little bit. But how are you feeling about the safeties? And we can touch on cornerbacks too, although for the most part, people usually don't use a ton of quarterbacks in leagues. How are you feeling about the safety group this year?
Yeah, I mean, the safety is probably the strength of the secondary. I mean, it definitely is, especially when you compare it to corner. But I think they're really not really strong at safety. They're pretty strong at safety when you consider the player that Marcus May is. And I know you brought up Ashton Davis, but the player that both Ulbrich and Saleh have talked about a lot, and you referenced earlier, is LaMarcus Joyner. They've referred to him as the Jimmy Ward of this potentially of this defense.
Ouch.
And Jimmy Ward.
I'm not a Jimmy Ward fan. So
no, and that's fine from maybe an IDP perspective, but
right.
I think from a defense perspective, the Jets view LaMarcus Joyner as they've said this multiple times, that Jimmy Ward is the key that unlocks the Niners defense because of his ability to not only play safety, but also to match up with tight ends and slot receivers in the slot. And even potentially line up as an outside corner every now and then. He's what allows them to do some of the funky stuff that they do on the back end. And so LaMarcus Joyner filling in that piece allows Marcus May to just be the do-it-all safety that we kind of saw him fill that role last year after the departure of Jamal Adams. And then you talked about Ashton Davis, to me is just like untapped potential, because you see the guy, you see the film, you see the testing numbers, and you're like, this guy is just, built like a free safety. I mean, the range is through the roof. And I actually said it at the time when he was drafted, that because a lot of people were like, oh, this means they're 100% going to trade Jamal Adams, which they ended up doing. But I said at the time, I don't think that Ashton Davis is your Jamal Adams replacement. I think he's your Marcus May replacement. And I think that still stands, because you look at the situation with Marcus May. He's 28 years old. He's, obviously on the franchise tag. It makes the most sense for the New York Jets to franchise tag him again, let him play out his age 29 season. Then Marcus May is hitting free agency at 30. You've already seen what you have potentially in Ashton Davis. You've already maybe drafted some more safeties to fill in this defense. So I think Marcus May, probably looking at 2 years max left with the green and white, and strictly only because it's an age thing. I mean, when he was drafted, I think he was 24 years old, if I'm not mistaken. So he was already an older player coming into the league, and it just sucks for him, because as a player, he wants a long-term deal, but the franchise tag gives the team all the leverage in this situation. And so I think that Marcus May probably is going to play, again, at least at most 2 years left with the New York Jets.
What? So May is going to be your starting strong or free?
I think he'll start out. At strong, but I think ultimately, because the Jets are so weak at corner, I think the best package for the New York Jets is 3 safeties on the field.
Yeah.
And so I think you'll see either LaMarcus Joyner playing the slot, which then will allow Ashton Davis and Marcus May to be potentially used interchangeably between free and strong. I think that because, again, Ashton Davis makes a ton of sense as your free safety, but we saw him play a ton of strong safety last year with Greg Williams. He was down in the box a lot, down on the line of scrimmage. So he showed that he could at least do that. But to me, I mean, when I watch him, I'm like, I just see free safety in him, especially with that range. And Marcus May already showed he could play both spots at a pretty high level. So again, if LaMarcus, just context clues and deductive reasoning here, but if LaMarcus Joyner is the key that unlocks this, then to me, it's three safeties is the way to go.
Yeah, and I mean, Joyner is kind of nice in that sense where, again, it's another veteran for a pretty young secondary, and he is able to just play all over the place. I mean, he did a lot of cornerback, and then he sort of made that switch to the NFL and has been bouncing around, so he can do both. He's reliable. I thought it was a nice signing for him, but it will be interesting to see how it plays out. And we should touch on cornerback. I mean, any of these guys sort of excite you? I mean, some of them had Bless Austin, I think, had a couple of really good games there, or a stretch, and I think he got hurt then, and they kind of just bounced around. So do any of these guys sort of excite you if you're picking someone up off of waivers?
Yeah.
I mean, the guy that plays opposite Bryce Hall, maybe, because he'll probably get picked on a little bit. I mean, that's the only thing I could think of, right? I mean,
right.
I think they did draft 3 rookie corners. I don't know why the one escapes me, the one from Pittsburgh.
One of them was the other Michael Carter.
Because they're corners.
Yeah, the other Michael Carter. They took Brandon Eccles. Brandon Pinnock is the one I'm thinking of.
Okay.
The corner from Pittsburgh. So if you get Brandon Pinnock out there starting at corner, I mean, we've seen first-round corners be a cheat code in IDP. I think Brandon Pinnock could potentially be a cheat code as well, just because he's going to get targeted so much. I mean, I just have to imagine Bryce Hall coming in a year 2. I think he'll be a pretty good player. I think he fits this, Sala doesn't call it a cover 3, but I think he fits the Seattle mold in terms of big, long corners very well. And so I think he'll fit this cover 3, cover 4 scheme that they're going to run. I think he'll fit that pretty well. But Brandon Pinnock, who's corner is all about volatility, right? I mean, it's going to you don't know what you're going to get. It's between pass deflections, interceptions.
They're 100% connected to what your pass rush is going to be. They're 100%.
There you go. I learn something new every time I'm on here.
Yeah, if you've got that pass rush, if you've got a guy, say Lawson can get in there, he's in there in that, that window, putting the pressure on him. It only takes a few times a game. Next thing you know, you get the quarterback throwing air balls and everything else. It's just that deep defensive line, that pass rush is a big part of that. The one thing that I want to ask, so you're on the clock. You've got May, Joyner, and I'll hack his name up. The other rookie, the second-year guy. Who you taking?
Hamza Nasruddin?
Yeah. Who you taking for?
Oh, you're talking about Ashton Davis.
Yeah. Who you talking for? Or who you taking between the 3 safeties there off the board first for upside this season?
Upside this season.
Yeah, for the IDP.
Well, you threw that upside thing in there, which immediately makes me want to go Ashton Davis, because I'm like, I don't know what. He's the unknown, but I think I'm going to stick to my guns and go with Marcus May still, just because I think ultimately his role is the most secure. Ashton Davis really hasn't been practicing. He's been dealing with some injuries. So we don't even really.
I had to ask, because when my rankings come out on the site on Gridiron Ratings, those 2 are like 1 and 2. They're right there together. I got them. I kept switching them. Who, May, him. I'm going to have to look at. That's what I was writing down a while ago. I'm going to have to move Joyner up a little bit. I'm glad you came on and enlightened me. I appreciate it.
There's problem, man.
It's hard for me to track every single one of them every time, So
Absolutely.
I appreciate this heads up.
So we got one more thing in here. I know this is an IDP show, but for our viewers that play team defense too, we want to get your thoughts on how you feel about them. I did a little bit of looking into this. They were sort of average last year for the most part, but they were really good against the run. Is that something you see continuing, or do you see a little bit of an uptick in improvement overall for them, where they might be a spot starter for you if you do team defense?
Yeah, it was interesting because I was having this conversation with my co-host the other day. He brought it up on my show, how they were pretty good against the run. And I don't know the answer to this question, but was it because they were so bad against the pass that they were so good against the run that there was no point to run the ball? I mean, it's a legitimate question I have. I mean, you obviously look at the defensive line and it leads you to believe that, hey, there's probably not much success running against that defensive line. But in terms of the defense in general, I think that you're going to see a greater emphasis on the pass rush, and I think that will probably potentially weaken how they do against the run, because I think they're going to have their defensive line be a little bit more aggressive. What's that old adage? Stop the run on the way to the quarterback. So I think you'll see some of that. In terms of, are they going to be useful? I mean, there's some games on here where I think, they've got to stretch Houston, Philadelphia. We don't know what the Saints quarterback is going to be. So that's three stretches. That's a stretch of 3 games right there where they could be useful potentially from a defensive perspective. Again, it's going to come down to if you look at the Niners 2 years ago, that was an all-star caliber defense special teams unit, and they went absolute bananas. And it was because of sacks, QB hits, turnovers. There's a stat I like to track. I started tracking it last year, which is what I call havoc rate, which is what percentage of quarterback dropbacks or what percentage of pass plays do you force either a quarterback hit, a sack, a pass deflection, an interception. Actually, not even just pass plays. I started looking at just total plays, a tackle for loss. Like, how often is this defense essentially causing havoc? And so that's something the Niners were pretty good at 2 years ago. Fell off, obviously, last year with a lot of the injuries. But I think that if the Jets can get into the top 12 of that category of quote-unquote wreaking havoc, then I think that we could definitely see some useful weeks out of them.
Sounds good. Gary, any final questions you got for John?
Not whatsoever, John. I really appreciate it, man. You definitely enlightened me.
No, absolutely, man. The pleasure's all mine. Look, to sit here and talk IDP is usually fun. I'm spending so much time talking offense that, to sit down and talk about IDPs and talk about, because for me, IDPs, like, and again, Gary, your process is probably way different than mine, because you probably look at everything the way I look at offense, which is everything's broken down to every snap and every opportunity and every potential play that can be made. Whereas when I talk about IDPs, I'm just talking about football. I'm just talking about stuff I see.
Well, and this counts, especially when we was breaking down the Jets like this. I was excited about this. A lot of people might not have been, but seeing finally something might change on this IDP side of the ball for the Jets. Something is right at the changes that they say they're going to make on the scheme and all this and the personnel. I'm excited to find out who's doing it. I want to know if we've got better plays, because it's been a while, man. You've had Hewitt's been your best player for IDP for the last, Adams. I'm sorry, you lost Adams though. So, next to that, like last year, he was Hewitt for 2 years in a row because of injuries. I'm not excited about that. I wanted to hear this tonight. So thanks for joining us.
Hey, pleasure's all mine again. Definitely appreciate y'all. And again, everyone listening, you could follow my work at JR Football Nerd. I'm constantly tweeting. I'm constantly whether it's my rankings or podcast episodes or even sound bites from episodes I've done with guests. I'm in the middle of this divisional breakdown, almost wrapped up. I've got one more division that's coming out tomorrow, the NFC West, and next week the last division, which is the AFC West, and I've completed all 8 divisions. And that gif of that guy that comes in with his backpack exhausted and falls down and face on the floor, that will be me when this divisional breakdown is all done, because 8 weeks of this, I am exhausted.
Yep. So go follow him, folks.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us on Getting Defensive, brought to you by Gridiron Ratings, and I hope you all have a good night.
Peace out.
Bye.